taking time. How significant do you have to change your projects, or don't you? Do you end up, you start off here, you go through this process, and at the end, you're 90% the same, you're 50% the same as it started out? Is it, and then project to project probably differs. Can you put any kind of number on how vastly different the project starts, where you start from and where you end, typically? Or can't you do that?
Would you like me to start with the microphone?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'd say it's probably in the 90% the same most of the time. The exceptions might be if you have a specific species or some sort of a very specific environmental issue where we're going to go talk to the gentleman with the mitigation bank, and that is a wonderful tool. It's much better to be able to do that. But I'd say on the overwhelming projects that we work on, maybe urban ones might be a little different because they might be larger. I'd say we don't change much at all. We know pretty much what we want to do. The bridge doesn't change. It might move a foot or two. You know, you might look at another alternative that's a few feet here or there if you're trying to avoid something significant, some archaeological issue or something. But by and large, it doesn't change.
So you spend 40 cents on the dollar and it changes very small.
Very little.
And I would offer that it's been 100% the same in our experience. I'll give you an example of an intersection widening, traffic safety improvement. The public was saying, when is this going to be done out here in a partnership between Fresno and Clovis? Willow and Shepherd was a good example. We had an old, a very small adobe building. It was the farmer's pump house that had long since been abandoned. We had to do a property survey report of what that was. I'll give you another example. We had to, we once had a right turn pocket we were doing. We just went into an auto repairs parking lot at one point. Didn't touch the building at all. We were delayed 2 years and spent about $40,000 doing a historic property survey report because the auto repair shop was 55 years old. Didn't touch the building at all. Drove up the, it was a $200,000 project to do the turn pocket and some signal work. And again, we spent about over 40 to 50,000 going through environmental, plus 2 years of delay.
Having those kinds of examples for us is extremely important because people talk, but if you're able to say, look at this project, look at these several thousand projects, and this is what it costs, it's very helpful. So if you can sort of put that together.
Yeah, Mr. Moser, if you could put together your timeline of this and some of the challenges and agencies that you had to go through just for a simple project like that, it would be helpful as we're debating.
Glad to do that, Thomas.
Thank you. Next question I have is to our Transportation Commissioner, Mr. Semi. You live here. You know the amount of trucks that we have to have on the road here just to get our ag products to market. When you're debating California transportation projects, how does the state address the difference between commutes, bottlenecks between freight versus just commuters on the road? I mean, here, especially in the Fresno area, and as well in Modesto, we see a number of bottlenecks with a huge number of trucks that are on the road. They're also competing with the commuters in that morning traffic.
So far, we've been looking to the local counties, local COGs, to come up with recommendations and solutions for their regions. But as part of the new planning committee, we're looking at California as a whole and looking at all the agencies to bring them under one umbrella to look at, again, goods movement challenges versus congestion relief versus air quality. And that's a report that we'll have prepared for you in April. But basically, again, we look at individual council of governments to look at their, to come up with their solutions for their challenges in their own county.
And do you ever foresee a dedicated freight highway or dedicated freight lanes anywhere in California's future?
Those are some of the topics that we're discussing as part of this plan, multi-modal plan.
Thank you. And I just have one final question. It is surprising to me to see how far our aggregates travel now when we have so many local resources and how much that drives up the project. I mean, if you could just explain a little bit more the challenges that you're facing. I mean, we're bringing aggregates over from Europe when we...
We're bringing aggregates in from British Columbia to the Bay Area. Locally, we're bringing aggregates from Kalinga, which is about 60 miles away. several 100,000 tons a year. To give you an idea of the impact of that, we probably have 30 to 40 trucks on the road a day, all day long. When we were hauling aggregates from just on the edge of town, we probably had 5 to 7 trucks hauling aggregate all day long. So the impacts, you know, we've got competing land uses, and typically when we move further away from metropolitan areas, people aren't so concerned about competing land uses. So as we move away, we have other impacts that unfortunately aren't considered as important. But we have more trucks on the road, we use more fuel, we have more emissions. But that's what it comes down to, competing land use. We've got the Department of Conservation of California has identified what it calls mineral resource zones, where planning departments are to take that information and use that information in long-term planning decisions. And unfortunately, I don't know that information is taken as seriously as it should be.
And what regulations or what regulatory agencies are holding up the permitting process to get aggregates from the local area?
CEQA for us is probably the biggest obstacle for us, but we face every possible agency and regulation there is when it comes to siting an aggregate or a mine site. You know, I equate a mine site to a wastewater treatment plant. Everybody needs it, everybody in this room uses it, but nobody really wants it in their backyard. But we face probably as much regulation as you can possibly face in siting a mine site. But CEQA is by far, you know, I think if you look at the regulatory timeframes that are in CEQA, and you went by the statutory timeframes, you should be able to get a project through in about 14 to 16 months. Unfortunately, it's drug out to many years for us. And I think part of that is one person mentioned the fear of litigation. We pretty much know that we'll probably get sued once we permit a mine site. And I think the counties and the planning staffs are cognizant of that. So they're much more conservative than they would be otherwise in the decisions they make. So we tend to go through more hoops than we might otherwise.
Thank you, and I would ask you as well if you could submit to this committee the steps that you have to go through in the permitting process, the different agencies that you have to go to, and a timeline with that. That would be helpful as well as we go through this process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Recognize the lady from California, Ms. Richardson, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two basic areas I want to focus on. First of all, Mr. Coyle, Gilpin, and Diridan. I brought forward a piece of legislation called the Freight Focus Act, and what it would do is enable the private sector to support us in terms of increasing the gas tax, to be able to have a dedicated funding source for goods movement. And in California, unfortunately, we have a horrible record of rating when you come forward in good faith, even with the public, to provide funding that we say it's for transportation and then we turn around and we take it to balance the budget. So first of all, I would urge you to review the bill. It's called the Freight Focus Act, but I'd just like to get your feedback. Would you be completely opposed to considering a funding source, for example, on diesel tax, that your folks would end up having to pay that would enable, if it was dedicated to the goods movement corridors, would you be amenable to considering that? I'll start with you, Mr. Duridan.
I can speak quickly.
Sure.
Richard Coyle. And I'm here representing myself, but I'm also a member of the American Trucking Association,
Right.
California Trucking Association. And we don't oppose a diesel fuel tax, as long as, you hit the nail on the head,
Right.
as long as the dollars are reinvested into our highways and not diverted to general fund issues. So, toll lanes, different subject, but dedicated funds from a diesel tax, we do support that.
Thank you.
Congressmember, I'll speak from the perspective of the Minetta Transportation Institute. We are the National Transportation Finance Center among universities and have done extensive research in regard to public acceptability to various kinds of transportation funding. Have submitted much of that research to the committee in the prior years. Hope that you've had a chance to look at it, but it does indicate potential public support for a vehicle miles traveled tax. Now, the gas tax kind of does that, but it isn't quite a vehicle miles traveled tax. And the public, if you relate the financing of transportation systems more on a vehicle miles traveled, even adding something in regard to the efficiency of the vehicle being used, I think you'll find receptivity among the public, certainly over 50%, not quite 2/3, for a revenue increase in that way. That revenue source has to be increased. You're going to have a very sparse-looking bill unless you have new revenue. We know that, and stand ready to support you as you look at VMT type of motor vehicle fuel taxes.
Mr. Gilpin?
No, I don't think we would be opposed to such a tax. You know, as long as when taxes are levied across our entire industry, it doesn't affect the competitiveness, recognizing, of course, that those taxes are passed on to the consumer ultimately.
Right. The reason why I asked the question is Mr. Micah is under a tremendous amount of, and really Mr. Denham and Schuster as well. Our bill, I believe in 2005, was only $244 billion. And the surface transportation report that was done, the study said that we need a minimum of $200 billion just to maintain the roads that we have. So if that leaves us with $44 billion, that's not enough to do, obviously, all the projects that we need. But unfortunately, we don't have we as elected officials have minimal credibility in terms of really being able to wall off being able to collect these funds and to keep our commitments. So I'm going to be making a tremendous appeal to the chairman that if the industry is willing to support taxing themselves, that it should be on the table for consideration. Otherwise, there's no way we can do all the projects that we desperately need to do. My second question has to do with NEPA-CEQA, and as Mr. Wright has mentioned, I'm actually an author of a bill of that, trying to minimize some of the hoops that you're having to jump through. So if I hear what you're saying, both Mr. Benjamin, Moser, Ryan, Redenor, that if we could eliminate the overlapping, kind of the linear type of approach, and if we could also put something in place that if it's an existing right-of-way that you're making some sort of changes to, that would be a tremendous enhancement if we could address those 2 points. Is that correct? Okay, so overlapping and the linear, not being able to be concurrent in terms of moving forward. Okay, those were the 2 things I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, Congresswoman Richardson, can I make just a comment on the tax question that you raised?
Sure, yes.
Your approach is absolutely right, because we've seen cases where dedicated resources and funding has been put in place and then the dollars diverted. An example of that is with our harbor maintenance tax, which you may be familiar with, of course, where there is a clear-cut opportunity where dollars are associated for imports, and they're supposed to go towards maintaining our ports, and yet those dollars are being diverted, creating this imbalance and putting stress when we come back and ask you to look at ports. So we just take a look at these existing resources, see where we can right-size them or return them to their intended purpose.
I actually have legislation on that as well, so I'm looking forward to partnering with my chairman here, because I completely agree with you. The HMT funds are there. It should be utilized to do the dredging for the projects that we need, and it shouldn't be used to balance the overall budget. It's wrong, and I will stand with the chairman to work on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.